So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it right over to Taiwo and to kick us off, and we should be done in about an hour.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. Can you all hear me? Okay, great, thank you. Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem and Council members, and thank you very much for taking the time. I started today thinking that it was the week of Christmas and we have TAP and Council rezoning. Exciting today. Well, happy holidays, and thank you for pointing out that correction. While this looks like it's scheduled for 2.5 hours on your respective calendars, we're hopeful that we can actually be done in an hour. So I will focus my presentations on the recommendations and next steps, and then open that to you for discussion. So if we could have the PowerPoint on, and I can walk us through that. Thank you. Thank you. Let's go to the next slide. I think Mayor Pro Tem summarized this. On December 14, the Council was formally presented with the task force final report. Mayor referred the report and task force recommendations to this committee for review and recommendations with the goal for review of the recommendations with the goal to have an interim report out at the January 4, 2021 Council meeting and a final committee report at the January 2021 strategy session. Next slide. This next slide is just a reminder of what the task force was charged with right from the onset. 3 things that the task force were asked to focus on. Number 1, to develop a transformational mobility network out of plans that were already adopted by the Council and that have gone through public process. So the task force essentially was not charged with creating anything new other than to look through existing plans such as 2030 Transit System Plan, the Transportation Action Plan, the Strategic Energy Action Plan, the Charlotte Bikes Plan, the Charlotte Moves Plan, Charlotte Walks Plan, and then ongoing plans such as the MEC Playbook for the MEC County Greenway Master Plan, as well as the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Then secondly, they were also asked, based on that network that they developed from those plans, to develop a funding strategy. Not necessarily a funding plan, but to define a funding strategy that will be subject to refinement by Council and staff later on, and then to consider the possibility of putting this before voters for a fall 2021 referendum. Next slide. So, as you've heard, on December 14, the task force presented 3 recommendations to you, and I will walk through them quickly. And these are for you to discuss today for your report out on January 4, at least initial report out on January 4, and a final report out at the Council Annual Strategy meeting on January 11 and 12. Next slide is the first recommendation to invest in mobility to meet our changing needs. As we all know, Charlotte is changing rapidly. Even during this pandemic, growth has not stopped, and we continue to push forward, and we will continue to see that for the foreseeable future. So the task force developed a mobility investment program that we've been referring to as the Transformational Mobility Network that could cost between $8 to $12 billion overall, but the local portion of it will be $4 to $6 billion. So the recommendation from the task force to Council is to endorse that and to look at it that it meets our current and future needs for mobility in our community, but also to develop some degree of accountability and transparency by having a dashboard where the community can actually see what that investment is and what it is for. Second recommendation is to align our mobility investment with related initiatives. The task force understand definitely that the city has a lot of other things that we are working on, and that you are going to consider these recommendations by aligning them with other initiatives either that have gone on, such as the Strategic Energy Action Plan that talks about carbon neutrality in the next 10 years. But also, how do we achieve that could be through a mode share target that we identify, but also to look at how this investment in mobility does not result in displacement of residents and rather promote housing affordability, and to consider the feasibility of a transit fare reduction. The third recommendation is to commit the resources to achieve that vision, which the task force has been referring to as 1 cent for mobility, which will be countywide, but we'll also focus on transit services as well as non-transit services such as sidewalks improvements, potholes on our streets, mitigating congestions, widening sidewalks where we can, and filling those gaps, but also trails, bike accessibility for people who ride regularly, but also if we need to augment that sales tax, depending on what happens as the state legislature, to consider a significant one-time capital investment program bond, which will be funded through a property tax. However, regardless of how we fund this, to position us for a fall 2021 referendum. Next slide, we'll talk about the funding strategy, and you've seen that before, that as you consider all of this, next slide, that as you consider all of this is to think about this funding as being financed over a 30-year period, which takes into consideration the fact that our region will continue to grow with the number of households that we have today. Right now, the households that we have today, the number of households in Charlotte is roughly 426,000, just a little bit over 426,000. If the county adds another 8,000 to 10,000 households every year, over a 30-year period, that would definitely result in about an additional 300,000. So it's really financing it over that period of time. What the funding strategy that the task force has recommended, what it has not considered is economic growth over that period of financing. But we also know that without partnership from the state and federal level, it will be very difficult to achieve this. But being able to have a successful referendum at the local level that will raise the sales tax that's needed definitely will position us for a federal match. But we also, for a federal grant, but we also understand that we need state authorization in order for us to achieve that 1 cent for mobility. However, that's where partnership is very key, and that's where we continue to have ongoing conversations at the state and federal level. I'll share the next slide with you. You have not seen this slide before, but in my presentations to you, whether on December 14 or to the Mecklenburg Board of County Commissioners on December 15, we had a number of comments, and I will summarize them on the next slide. There seems to be an overall support for the mobility network, regardless of how anyone feels about the cost or the 1 cent for mobility. Everyone believes that we are growing at a pace that demands that we begin to match growth with infrastructure, especially transportation infrastructure. Everyone believes that the focus should not just be on rail, but also bus, because that's what 80% of our riders today will use. But not only focus on transit, however, to focus on greenways, bikeways, as well as walkways for pedestrians, understanding very well that today we have 3 areas, especially where we have huge amount of traffic congestions: the University City area, the Steel Creek area, South Charlotte area, and how can we also invest in roadway improvements in those areas. So everyone is on board with the fact that we need today an investment in a mobility network that will allow us to continue to grow, and to grow in such a way that it offers people the choice of whichever mode of transportation that they want to use in our community. But we've also heard from both the council and the commission, and also from comments that have been filtering back to us from the community, that how do we prioritize this? And I will get to that in a minute. what exactly will be the cost breakdown between the different modes. We've had concerns with regards to, is this the right timing to do this, and what will be the schedule, especially considering that we're going through a pandemic at this point in time. We've had comments regarding impacts on vulnerable communities and potential for displacement, seniors, people of color, and how we need to be very mindful of that. We've got comments regarding the impact of technology, or what I would call emerging technology, on public transportation. Especially we've had 5G brought up, as well as the potential impact of connected and autonomous vehicles. We've also had people talk about transit services that have been impacted as a result of the coronavirus and whether they will pick up again. And why do we need such investment at this point in time when we do not know what happens in the future? There are also conversations and comments with regard to prior commitments, especially when we talk about North Mecklenburg and the Red Line, as well as even the Gold Line, and how we need to be mindful of those prior commitments as we go forward with these recommendations and investments. We've had, again, what exactly does it look like for us regionally in terms of connectivity, and how are we engaging other counties and partners? Right now, the focus is on Charlotte and Mecklenburg County with this 1 cent for mobility, but also being mindful of what's going on in the counties around us, especially with the work that Regional Council is doing on Connect Beyond. So we're mindful of all these comments, and we're working through them. Over the next several weeks, you'll be hearing from us how we respond to all of these comments. Next slide will be the next steps. You've seen this before as well. On December 14, the task force presented its recommendations to Council. On December 15, we presented it to the county commissioners. On December 21 today, we're sharing this with you so that you can review and decide what your initial report out will be to Council on January 4. There will be a public comment opportunity on January 4, where Council will be receiving comments from the community. Will also be an opportunity, obviously, for Council to know, outside of the comments that I just shared with you, if you are hearing anything new from the community. On January 11/January 12, Council will be having its annual strategy meeting, and there will be an opportunity at that point in time to direct the city manager to proceed with the legislative strategy and a refinement of the funding strategy that the task force already defined. And over the next several weeks, we'll be working to refine. As we work to refine that funding strategy, we'll also be developing recommendations for a program of infrastructure. And at that point in time, we do believe that Council will have the opportunity to adopt the refined funding strategy. With regards to the program of infrastructure, while we're going to be able to share with you some snapshot in January, we will, over time, be making sure that we align with our CIP process through the budget process to make sure that we are not out of alignment when the manager brings the budget to you in early summer of 2021. My final slide is really about how this goes forward with regards to project definition and evaluation. I talked about prioritization earlier on and how people are interested in how do you select these projects. The fact is that we're not starting from scratch. I mentioned earlier on that the task force was not creating anything new, but looking at adopted projects, adopted plans, programs and policies, whether they be region-wide or city-wide or county-wide. So definitely we're not starting from scratch. We have bases for which that can actually aid us in the process of defining what projects will be considered for funding in this mobility investment. We do know that to a large degree, we understand some projects such as the Blue Line going from where it is today through Pineville to Ballantyne, but how much will that cost? We do understand to a large degree what the Silver Line from Matthews to Sam Wilson around the airport that that's part of the project because those were already in a 2030 transit system plan. Our Envision My Ride has also given us a very good idea as to the investment in our bus system. So we know which, if you look at the report that we released, we identified up to about 22 bus routes where we can actually make improvements for about 15 minutes headways or less, so that people don't have to wait 30 minutes or longer for the next bus. But we will be walking through that type of document over the next several weeks as well to make sure that we have accurate information for you. Our Transportation Action Plan, the Council adopted just a few years back, giving us a very good idea of what our roadway network investments and improvements should be like. Our Charlotte Bikes and Charlotte Walks have also given us a very good idea. We have a Greenway Master Plan that was adopted in 2017 or 2018, and the county is working on their playbook right now. And so all of those things will factor into the projects that are defined that eventually come before council in the next few weeks. But some are better defined at this point than others, but we'll be working closely with our county colleagues. But since this is also county-wide, we'll be working very closely with municipalities, the different towns, to make sure that their projects, whether they are non-transit projects, we are also having information about what those are and what the cost of those will be. So we'll define what we call a project atlas, which will be subject to delineation and development of a list, and then we start to evaluate them and make sure that we're able to respond to the question of what's in it for me. That is, there should be something for everyone, regardless of where they live within the city and within the county. And not just transit, but also the non-transit piece. So this is going to be a heavy lift for us over the next few weeks. Starting this coming week, we'll begin to meet to define what those projects are. Again, we're not starting from scratch because we already have some adopted plans and policies that will get us to that place. And hopefully in January, we'll be able to give you some snapshot of what that will look like. That's the conclusion to my presentation today. I will yield this back to Mayor Pro Tem to guide the conversations around this, and I will only speak if there are specific questions for me. I like to also say that my colleague, our Chief Financial Officer, Kelly Flannery, is here if there are specific questions for her with regards to next steps on the funding piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Taiwo. I didn't see Mr. Driggs joining the committee, so Larkin or Braxton, do you guys have any questions? Braxton, do you have anything?
I just got a couple of comments, really, towards us, and I just think what we're going to have to do as a council, and I hope our whole body discussion gets to, we'll have a lot of discussions on how to make this thing successful over this next year. But I think, first and foremost, I hope we can get to a unanimous kind of agreement that, this needs to happen. If we want to take care of our economic mobility problem, we're going to have to make an economic investment in mobility. And we can argue about ultimately what that means. But this is, as Taiwo said, this is going to be about harnessing the good, hard work that the community has done together over the decades. And it will be council's job to kind of, over these next couple months, to go back to those groups that have given input to all of those plans and to get their buy-in, for the ability to see those ideas to come to fruition, because some of those groups are not going to implicitly see that, and I hope that we can all go back, as the 12 of us, go back to our the groups that we are most connected to really work with them to get that buy-in.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Winston. Good points. Sarah said that Mr. Driggs has some questions. I don't see him, but go ahead, Mr. Driggs, if you're on. Oh, there you are. Okay. Do you have questions?
Yes. I'm having some technology issues here. So can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. I wanted to point out, Mr. Jayoba, that we are proceeding on the basis of previously adopted plans. There was never a time in the 7 years that I've been on council that we discussed feasibility or financing or any of the other things that we would need to do in order to properly describe our conversations up to this point as having approved these plans. There was an agreement about what it was, what our goals were, and where we thought the transportation should be. But I often have a difficulty in these staff processes because stuff is brought to us and we see a presentation and we're saying, do you like it? Do you not like it? Yeah, it looks good. Hang on one sec. That's just Katie trying to get my video up, but I'll just talk. As far as I'm aware, in the 7 years that I've been around, there has never been a conversation about feasibility, about alternatives, about financing. So I don't consider this to be an adopted plan that is binding on us in the sense that it's now being suggested. We have not agreed to do this and to pay for it in a time frame. We haven't agreed to do it all at once. And I just find it kind of difficult to react to the way this is now coming forward when the first time I remember hearing anything about the sort of financial implications was in the last couple of months. And how can we be said to have agreed to anything when we didn't even see that in spite of repeated requests for years, going back tied to before your time? So I do know from input that I've had that others who are expected to participate in this feel that this is a Charlotte project. And it's not clear to them why this wasn't done on a more inclusive basis the whole time, and why some of the things that went into choosing this particular plan were not discussed with them while the plan was being formulated. We absolutely need a transit plan. We need a big one. And I don't think there's any disagreement about that. There's nothing that says that this is the only one, that it has to be this one, or that we have actually agreed previously to pursue this particular course of action. So I'm just a little upset, I have been for quite a long time, at how this is being done. And I think we're starting to encounter some of the problems that might be associated with that. There have been real questions about whether this should have been done by an authority, for example, whether we should have established the partnership of all of the participants early on and had the group, the authority together work on this instead of having stuff coming out of Charlotte and being just presented to the towns the same way it has been to council, like, here, let's do this. I want us to get to a place where we can proceed with a plan and adopt one because we need one. And I recognize that any plan is going to entail quite a substantial commitment. But I feel a little bit cornered about this one. And I don't feel yet that I've seen the kind of financial analysis and other supporting sort of evidence. I mean, Mayor Pro Tem raised the question of, can we get a breakdown at least of, how these $12 billion are going to be allocated to the various transportation projects. It's just a bunch of stuff that we ought to know and ought to have been involved in deciding that we're now being told it's time to vote on. So I think my position at the moment is I'm not ready to vote on it. That doesn't mean that it is my intention to just sort of be in opposition the whole time. But I think that we've got a big challenge, frankly, getting this referendum done. And I worry about the situation where we continue down this path and we find out next November that the public is not prepared to go along with this, or that the General Assembly is not prepared to. And we will have spent all of this time and $50 million working on something that is not going to be realized in the way it's currently contemplated. So I think I'm not sure what the fix is, but personally, I need more before I'm ready to sign off on a plan. I guess I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Mr. Winston has another question or comment.
Well, I hear a lot of what Mr. Driggs said, and I think what he just spoke about is the breadth and depth of the type of conversation that we're going to have to have. I agree with a lot that Mr. Driggs said. But I think what we're going to have to do, the challenge of us as a council and mayor are going to be, is how do we break up all of those points and all of those concerns that Mr. Driggs just laid out there, and how do we go out and have those kind of all of those conversations at the same time and work through those policy decisions, which are going to be something that is separate than the funding decision and strategy, but they are all intersected, and they all have to happen separately at once. So that's kind of what I'm saying. How can we go out and some of us lead the equity discussions, as well as others can lead the funding discussions, as well as some of us can lead the kind of modal mix discussions versus figuring out how to deal with balancing the pandemic versus already existing plans and forms and functions of government. I think we have on top of the intergovernmental kind of buy-in and discussions that have to happen. So if we're not able to parse out those different legitimate concerns of our community and present a cogent kind of itemized discussion to the community between now and November, we are going to have a lot of trouble convincing folks. But I think we are quite capable and will be able to do that if we figure out kind of how to work together and conquer and divide those conversations that the community are going to hold our feet to the fire to have an answer to them.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Winston. I think we're all kind of coming at this sort of saying the same thing, but sort of from different perspectives. I personally just want really the nuts and bolts of what this looks like. If a 1% sales tax brings in $220 million a year, how does that get spent each year and on what projects? Presumably this package is so gigantic because of light rail. But if light rail's the first expense out of the gate, I'm going to struggle with that because I want to see completed sidewalks and bus drastic improvement in our bus system. So I think, Mr. Driggs has said that, Mr. Winston has talked about, the overall picture as well, but, we're going to really have to see the nuts and bolts of how this gets spent. And not that I've crunched the numbers in great detail, but I really have a sense that if we do it in the right order and offer mobility, other options for mobility in the forms of bus, sidewalks, greenways, bike paths, that we're going to show that the money you can save when it costs you almost about $6,000 a year to have a car in North Carolina. And if you're spending 3 hours on average a day on the bus, there is a savings to be achieved by having an efficient mobility system in our community that should, in theory, offset the cost of this. But we don't know what the cost of it is because we don't know what we're paying for. So I think that's going to be really, really important. So Mr. Driggs has another comment. Mr. Driggs?
Just to follow up, for one, I appreciate Mr. Winston's comments because I think he touches on a very important point, which is this has got to be sold. The people have got to be convinced about this. It's not just us, and we should be on board convincing others. And so part of my difficulty is I don't sort of feel that I have what I need to be able to go out and put my own sort of engagement to work. The other thing I've mentioned, Mayor Pro Tem, is the $220 million a year. There would be a pay-go component, so there would be an element of current investment of that money, but this whole financing plan relies on 30 years of receiving that money in order to pay for it. So we are committing all the proceeds from this tax for 30 years to realize a plan that will be complete in 10 years. What happens for the next 20? Are we assuming that when we've done this, that there will be no additional needs, nothing else that we want to do? And furthermore, what about the interest expense? Because if you do have a 30-year horizon for your funding and a 10-year horizon for your spending, clearly you're borrowing a lot. And so that's why I just think I'm not even necessarily prejudging the outcome, but I do think that we're entitled to see a better developed plan on when the money comes in, when it goes out, just a kind of an estimate of the future cash flows that we can look at in the context of our other capital spending and future needs, so that there's a kind of a broader concept of the thing. But it's critical that when we go to the public and at a time like this suggest to them that we need to raise taxes that will generate billions of dollars in additional public revenue over the next years, recognizing that the incidence of a lot of those taxes is in neighborhoods and in communities that can ill afford a tax increase, we had better have a really good explanation. So if, for example, what you said is true, and we can tell people, look at how much money you'll save by not owning a car. I lived in Manhattan. I didn't own a car. It was great. So, you know, if we can develop that in more detail and use it as a selling point, Mr. Bakari has spoken about economic development. All the people who don't expect to live on these corridors where the transportation is being added will participate in paying for them. So if you're a person in Charlotte who doesn't expect to benefit from this transportation because you won't use it or you won't live near it, then you have to be told air quality. You have to be told economic development, jobs. This is going to be a wonderful community because we have these things. And so the marketing strategy for this is critical. And the first step is it's got to be marketed to us. So we have to be able to look at it as taxpayers and citizens and recommend to the people that vote for us, you know, I would support this if I were you, and I think you should support it, and this is why. And so, again, to Mr. Winston's point, I think we have work to do to kind of generate that message and get it out.
And traffic congestion, let's not forget that one. Even if you don't want to ride the bus, you sure don't want to be stuck in the traffic
Exactly.
that is here now and is going to come with 300,000 to 400,000 people that are moving to the region. Mr. Winston?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to follow up on the follow-up. I hope that when we have this discussion in January to the full council, I don't think it could be overstated how important the kind of content, tone, and movement of our own discussions is going to be to this process. You know, as we are moving forward, if our conversations on council get stuck, you know, behind kind of topics and questions that kind of get regurgitated week after week, we're going to have trouble. So if we can kind of really focus on our meeting time of being efficient and bringing forward ideas and policy discussions, as you know, again, as Mr. Driggs has laid out all those different kind of compartmentalized ideas, that's going to be really important to the public confidence. So again, I think we're all working through of you know, as a council, of how to do that better in general. But I can't overestimate how important that's going to be week after week to the success of this. And I hope we can kind of start it on January 4th, kind of coalescing around that and figuring out how to be efficient in those discussions.
Yep. Great points. Mr. Winston, did Mr. Eggleston text you anything since he can't talk today?
I haven't seen anything or heard anything.
Okay. Okay. Well, does anyone else have questions? If not, then I'm going to give you the rest of your day back. So thank you, Mr. Jaiwoba, for the presentation. And it, you know, I recommend everybody keep reaching out because these are great questions. We need to get them out there now because they're going to come up anyway. So, you know, the more information we can get out and on the table, the better, so that we can do the work of trying to inform the people as to what this is going to look like. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
All right, Mr. Driggs is seconding. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a great holiday week and stay safe, stay healthy, get healthy. Mr. Eggleston, hope you feel better, and we will see you, I guess, in the new year. Thank you, everyone.
Happy holidays.